introduction to our webinar today. We're going to be looking at the two donor screens that are involved with displaying the donor record. Now, as most of you would know, the heart of the Donman system is the donor record, and that's where you get all the information directly about your donors themselves. So it's the most important data that you hold on the system, who your donors are, because without them, you've got nothing. So we're going to be concentrating on just the information that's on the donor screens. Next month we'll be looking at how to find donors on the screens, so we won't be covering anything of that nature today. Now, the donor screens will appear in a number of different places within the Donman system, in a number of the different programs. For instance, when you're recording donations, you will see those two screens there. And also there are places to create, say, page records or other forms of records where you will see those two donor screens. But most of the time when you just want to look somebody up or create a new donor or maybe make some changes, typically you would just go to the donor program. Now there's a couple of different places where you can access that. You can go via the housekeeping menu, and then you've got this create new edit existing donor, and that will bring up the first of the two donor screens. But most of the time, the best place to actually go to this is from the start menu. You can simply click on donor entry. So this is the first of two donor screens. I'm just going to press page down and bring up a donor on my screen. This is the first screen, and that's where most of the important information is kept. However, you can access the information from the second screen in a couple of different ways. If you're entering donors or details and you get to the bottom where it says press enter to continue, down in the bottom right hand corner here, when you press enter, it will bring up that second screen. But rather than going all the way through the screen to do that, F2 will swap you from the front screen to the back screen. Now, I'm going to be speaking fairly generally about some of the fields and the types of fields on the screen, and then I'll be passing over to Gary, who will be looking at more detail at some of the particulars about particular fields there. Now, I've done a screenshot, so I'm just going to swap to my screenshot because you'll see I've coloured some fields in there. Now, different fields have got different types. So, for instance, you'll see I've got different coloured fields. I've got blue fields. So these blue fields, like a donor number, is what we call an indexed field. What that means is that the system will automatically maintain an index on that field in order of that. So in the case of the donor number, the index is in donor number order. What that will allow me to do is to scroll up and down through the database in order of that field if my cursor is in that field. Now, just to go through those fields on the screen, the index fields are the donor number, this user number field over here, the combination of the first name and the second name, and I'll come back to that. We've got the company, the sort key, the postcode, and we've also got the email address. So if your cursor is on any of those fields, you can page up and down through the database in that order. So let me go back to the live screen. So if I clear the screen, my cursor, when I'm on a blank screen, is always in the donor number. So when I press page down, it has brought up the first of my donors. In this case, it's donor number 11. And as I continue to page down, you can see that it's going through in donor number order. Now, I'm actually using the keyboard to press page down, but down at the bottom here, next to the dollar, this is page down as well. That arrow's pointing to the right. Arrow pointing to the left goes in the opposite direction. That's the same as me pressing page up on the screen. Now, I said that, well, let me go back. Okay. Now, I said that the combination of the first name and the surname go together. So it doesn't matter which of those two fields my cursor is in. If I page up or page down, it will go through alphabetically based on the surname. But where you typically have a large number of records with the same surname, with Smith, within all of those Smith records, it will go alphabetically based on the first name. So I'm on John Smith at the moment. I've now gone to John and Edith Smith. I've gone to K Smith, another K Smith. Oh, I've got lots of K Smiths in there. So you can see within Smith, it is going alphabetically on the first name, but if I've now gone past Smith and on Jules Verne, Mr. and Mrs. Weir. Okay, so they are those index fields. Again, I can come down to, well, if I have something in the company, I can press and go A. It's now going through alphabetically on the company name. So if I go back to my screen, any of those light blue fields will act, and they are as an indexed field. The pinkish ones here, these are the red fields. And these are, when on your actual screen, it'll show in red, these are the coded fields. So these are the fields where you can't just type anything you like, it must be one of a predetermined list. So you can see we've got the title, and that one's a little bit different to normal. Donor type, we've got the suburb, the mail code. This field down here, which I'll come to, is actually user code. I've got the source code, member code, user code 2, auxiliary code, in-kind code, extra codes. And if I go to the second screen, you'll see we've also got the refer to code, the male and female job code, and we've also got user code 3. So when we're on the live screen, you'll notice that the blue fields are typically blue. They're the index ones. These ones are red. So let me go to donor type, because that's probably the most important of those coded fields. And when I click in there, you'll notice that I've got a ... button, and I can click on that, and I can see a list of the options that I've got there. If I try and choose something or type something in that's not one of those lists, like if I type in A, B, C, D or something, it says, no, I'm sorry, that's not a valid code, and I need to try again. Shift F1 will do the same as clicking on the ... And when I'm in here, I can just type in the first few letters and pick the field that I'm after. Or if I like to, I can just start to type in the field. So if I want school, I type S. There is actually a code for S, but if I type C, it then brings up the rest of that, because that's the first of the valid codes that starts with SC. We call that predictive coding. So in most cases, you probably don't need to type the whole code. Okay, so we have a large number of those different fields, and again, they're the ones in red. Okay, let me go back to the main screen. Now, there are a number of fields, and I've put those in yellow, where you can actually rename how they appear on the screen. So we've got this user number field. In this case, it hasn't really been renamed. We've got user code, which in this case has been renamed to sport, flag 1 and flag 2, user code 2, auxiliary code, and again, if I go to the second screen, we've got user code 3. So you can rename those to whatever you would like, up to about 8 characters in most cases, or I think 10 or 12 in the case of these two flag fields. So while within the file they might retain their normal name, on the screen they appear as you have renamed them, and that can be done in system defaults. We've also got some date fields, so these are the ones here in blue, and we've got some flag fields. Now the flag fields are simply yes or no questions. That's all that you can do for those. With the dates, let's go to the live screen now. So when you're in the date field, let's say no mail until. Oops, it doesn't like something over there. Okay, let me try that again. All right, so with the dates, there's a number of different ways of entering dates. You can put in the full date and say 01/01/say 2016, and that'll be fine. If I want, I could have done just 1/1/16. It fills that out. Instead of slashes, I can use dashes or dots and things like that, or I can go 01/01/16, and it does it as well. Now, if I go to, let me make that 01, well, I'll start again. I'll go 01/01, say 30, you'll notice it's gone to 1930. There is a cut-off, and it will vary from organisation to organisation, but typically it'd be around 1925. So if it's less than 25 as a two-digit year, it will assume that it's in the future, and that will be 2020 or 2025. If it's past a certain date, then in this case, it will do 1930, so it figures that it's a really old date. So if you're putting in someone's birthday as the first of the first 30, it would assume it's 1930. Now, as well as that, you can double-click in the field, and you can bring up one of these control boxes here, and so you can just choose the date that you want. Alternatively, if you want to put today's date anywhere in Donman where it's asking for a date, you can simply type a T and press enter, and that will put today's date. You can also go T plus or minus any number of days. So if this person were to ring up and say, look, I'm going overseas for 100 days, don't mail me in the meantime, you can just simply go T plus 100, and it will calculate the date 100 days from today, and that's the 26th of November this year. So that's any of those date fields. The coded fields like this typically are going to be 8 characters long, especially on the donor screen. However, things like the title is much longer than that. Also, you'll notice that the codes are uppercase. So apart from the title code, all the codes would be uppercase. Okay, now the fields that we haven't covered, things like the street one, these phone numbers, the only thing particularly special about those is that, like all fields in Donman, they will have a fixed length. So you just can't type and type and type and type. There will be a length, but it will vary from field to field. For instance, the title field, the first name and the surname are each up to 50 characters long. At the end of that, you've got post-nominals, or letters after a person's name. That is limited to 20 characters. Phone numbers are probably about 20. Obviously, flags are just 1 character. So it will vary from field to field. Comments, I think, is 100 characters. So at some point in time, you'll start typing too much and it'll just stop. You won't be able to enter any more information. Okay, other general points are that in Donman, you need to explicitly save records. So if I'm on a record here, let's say I've put in a birth date, 01/01/30, and I now want to save that. I have to explicitly save it because at this stage I haven't actually updated the database. All I've done is updated it on the screen. And so to update it on the database, if I'm on the front screen, I can click on Save. That will take me to the second screen. If I save again, that will then bring up a blank screen, which means in this case that I've saved it. Now there is a shortcut to bring up the last saved record, so I'll just do that by pressing Shift F10, and that brings up her record there. If I'd changed, maybe I've made a mistake, I'll change the date to 1931. I can right-click on the save, and that does exactly the same thing. However, if I'm sort of in one of the earlier fields, I might have to do that a couple of times anyway to get it to save. When I'm on a record, let's say I've brought up John Smith, if I want to go back to the donor number field, there is no way that I can get there. I can't click there, I can't shift tab or back tab to it or anything. The only way to get back to that field is to basically clear the screen. So you can do that by clicking on the clear button in the bottom left-hand corner or by pressing F12. In both cases, it will clear what's on the screen without saving it. If it thinks that I've made a change on that record, when I press clear, it will ask and make sure that I do want to clear before I lose any of those changes. So that's a good thing to actually do. All right. At this stage, I think that's probably all that we can go through in terms of the general information about the screen. I'll now hand over to Gary, who can go through some of the more specific details about some of the fields and what you can do with those.
Good afternoon. Thanks, Murray. So, most of the fields, as Murray went through them, are pretty straightforward. The only ones that are slightly different, and one of those certainly is the title field. So, unlike most of the codes that are on the screen for like the donor type, the suburb, mail code, source code, all of those things, they're predefined by going into the housekeeping donor descriptive codes and setting the codes up. So that helps us maintain structure of the database, because we can't have everyone just willy-nilly creating their own codes, because it doesn't help when we try and extract the data. The title code is one of the few that is different, and it works a little bit like the campaign group code, where if I go in and have a look at the titles that I've got in the system, I can certainly just use one of those, and the system will put that in. But if I've got something that hasn't been in the system before, if I just type in a title, the system will then come up with a prompt saying, do you want to add, saying that it's not in the list, do I want to add that to the list? If it was something that I thought, really I'm probably never going to use this particular one again because it might be a rather unique one, then I might say no. It'll still save the actual details on the person's record, but if I say yes, I then get a prompt to say that has now happened. So if I go to my list, so I've now got master as one of those codes. So it is a little bit different to all the other codes, and for that reason, sometimes you'll have a look in that list of codes, and it might be pretty messy because there's a whole lot of stuff that's gone in there historically from records that have been entered. Okay. The same as the other codes, though, I can't edit the code here so much, and I can't delete it. The only place I can do that sort of cleanup, again, is under housekeeping and donor descriptive codes, where you've got all the different codes, or under the additional codes menu in the case of the title codes. Okay, so it really is more of a dynamic list, because title's one of those things that isn't so important to the structure, unlike things like your donor type. So if I click on here, I've basically got things that I can choose from the list, but I can't add one on the fly. As Murray showed you before, if I put something in that's not in the list at the moment, it's just going to say bad luck. You can't do that. And the same sort of thing, if I just said, put a record in that's an individual, I can just type the first character for most of my coding, or maybe the first two. In the case here, you can see I've got a number of records or donor types that start with C. But if I type CH, don't have to do CHI for this child sponsorship to come up, because I've got CHU for the church. Okay, but if I did CL, then club and association would come up. So as best we can, built into the system, it has been made so that you can sort of do those things. Now, you may have noticed when Murray was scrolling through the records, because I've made a change to the record in this case, I've put the title in there, and I've pressed F12 to clear the screen. The system is now giving me a prompt to say, are you sure you want to clear the screen? So in this case, this is my anonymous record, so really I don't need a title on it. So I can say yes, but if you do that, the system will prompt you that, there's a good chance you've changed one of the fields and you haven't actually made a save yet. Okay. So if I close that, so the same as Murray showed, if I now go through and I just page down through the records, you'll see that there's different colors coming up. And that is dictated by the different extra codes down the bottom. Okay. So this is the only place that we can do this. So see, if I look at my list of extra codes, I've got board and I've got a color 5 designated for that, staff as a color 8, and volunteer. So they're not showing me the actual colors themselves, because when you set up the colors, you can have color 1 to be the combination of colors that you want it to be. It doesn't necessarily need to say that it's yellow or red or blue or whatever it may be. But it is a way that you can sort of highlight records so that as people are, looking up records or just scrolling through, that certainly you'll get a very visual change on the screen to say, this is something about this record. So it may be different, stakeholders in your organization or things that you want to just highlight. Like in this case, we've got board members. So as soon as we bring a board member up, it's going to change the whole, field background so that I know without actually looking to see that it's a board member down the bottom. Everything's going to tell me straight away once I do that. Okay. Other thing, sorry, I didn't mention about title. Just like we can see, title is upper and lower, as opposed to all of the other codes, which for the sake of consistency are all uppercase. Because to a computer, an uppercase character and a lowercase have got different values. So if we had a mixture of, things in there, so if I had business with, capital B and the rest lowercase and some all uppercase, some all lowercase, I wouldn't necessarily be able to find all of those records because of the variance in the actual values in the field. Okay. As we go through and you create a new record, just enter. The system will give us the next number available in the system. Depending if you're using the user code or not, on the right-hand side, the system will stop you there. You don't have to put anything in. Yeah. So as I put my record in, so you can see that by default, I've set a code here for most of my records. So when I put them in, automatically I'm going to say, look, the majority of my records are individual. So to make it a little bit quicker, I can put that as a default code. So that when I put that in, that'll happen automatically. But for the sake of a little bit of consistency with your data, and because for most of your code you'll be able to type one character to put them in, you might set these so that they're not a default value, and that means people have to look at the record a bit more closely to make sure we haven't got the wrong code, because I don't want to have a record chance where I might have a business name in here, but I've now said that it's an individual. In this particular case, it is just an individual, and the system automatically generates this sort key field. So you can see here it's based on the surname and the first four initials in the first name. If it was a company, the sort key will then generate based on the company field, and that is dictated by the code that you set up for the donor type. So you'll see the last character here is either a C or an S, which is telling the system to use the surname first name or to use the company name field to generate the sort key. The sort key helps us identify the records, so I do a full list alphabetically, but also if I do reports or receiving, the system will then use what I've designated for that record. So in the case of a person, I may have a business name here, but that's just the person's contact details. It's nothing to do with the money that comes from that person. It's purely individual money. And as such, when I do a report, it won't use the business name, it will use the person's name. And vice versa for a company, if I've said in here that it's a business record, the system will tell me that when I do the reports and receipting, that it is the business name that gets receipted. Okay. If I try and put something in here where there is no matching field, so there's nothing in the company field for this record, and enter, the system's going to tell me that there's something wrong. It can't generate the sort key, so it will take you back to the donor type to put in the correct one to suit the record that you're putting in. Okay. The same sort of way, the salutation can also be generated as a default value. The defaults are, you can have dear title first, dear title surname, sorry, it's the first salutation, or dear first name, or dear first name is the first, and then dear title and surname is the second. So in this case here, if I didn't have the actual person's name, and I go through, so it's now putting dear title surname because there's only one character in the first name field. So as such, it's no good putting dear P in the salutation because that's not going to help us, address that person later. So you can have that default value set, and that is set in Modify History Archive under System Defaults. If per chance I haven't got a name at all, so I've put a company in where I might have a contact that I don't actually have the person's name at the organization, then by default the system will put in something like this, where I've just written to the manager at the organization. It is a business, and you can see the sort key is generated based on the business name. And in this case, the system's just put dear supporter or dear, whatever you want to have as that sort of overriding salutation to say, look, we haven't got a name. If I enter a name now, because I found out later, and update that, the system will then say, do you want to update the salutation? Okay, so that will pretty much happen automatically. There's not a whole lot that we have to do about getting those things to happen. Okay. There's a couple of places when you enter a new record that the system will automatically do a duplicate check. Okay. So the first of those is when you go down and you put the new record in, as soon as you get to the postcode field and enter, So in this case, it's not doing anything because it's an existing record and I haven't actually changed anything. So if I have changed something about the record, okay, so it's now asking me about the salutation and the receipt names. Okay, so there's now a little delay, and there's a message down the bottom of the screen here showing me that it was now checking for duplicates. If it had found a potential duplicate because the name sounds similar and the record's in the same postcode, it'll alert me that there's possible duplicates, and I can then have a look and say, is it one of those people or not? Okay. The second place that will happen is on the email address. So as soon as you put the email address in, it'll also do a duplicate check on the existing records based on the email address. Because email is becoming more common, especially as we do more peer-to-peer sort of fundraising. Okay. So for most of that, as Murray said, the fields here for telephone, work, home, fax, mobile, etc. like that, there is a restriction on the length of the fields, but there's no sort of mark to say that the fields always have to go in the same order. Because if I were to put a mobile number in and do 8400, okay, so I can put it in, as you can see, with spaces, without spaces. It really doesn't matter to the system. And it's really for readability for yourself, that when you look at a record, you want to be able to read the number and have the spaces in there. The other big reason for doing that is the most common thing people do with the data is take it out of Donman into a text file, and from there they put it into Excel. And if there's no space, especially in your mobile numbers, the first thing that's going to happen is the zero is going to disappear from that number. Okay. When I've got a record on the screen, there are a number of places that I can do like an address lookup for a record. So if I go into one of my existing records here. Yeah. So I've got a person here. I don't have a phone number on them at the moment. So if I go into the surname field, and there's two ways you can do the search, you'll see down the bottom of the screen it's got Control F3, and that will do a white pages search. The same thing will happen on the company name. If perchance you've got a mouse with a scroll button, you can just click the scroll button down, the same as you would do the left and right mouse button. If you do that, the system will then go through looking for what we've put in, and it's saying it didn't find the match for this address, but it did find records around that. As in this case, the same record, but I've got a mobile number and I've got a phone number. So if it was perchance the same person and I don't have a phone number on my donor screen, then it would be fairly easy then to highlight that, copy it, paste it back onto the donor's record, and then just get rid of that last bracket. Apart from me not copying the number. Okay. But so you can see that you could then update the record. So perchance if you were processing a payment or something and the person's left something off the form, I haven't got their number at the moment, then I could do that and look up the record. In the case of a street address, I can do the same sort of thing. I can go to Street 1, and again I can press the Control F3 combination or click on the scroll button, and in this case it'll do a Google Map search. Yeah. So sometimes you'll get an address like this one that's sort of a long way from civilization, as we'd call it. So, but as you scroll out, you can then get an idea of where that record is, okay, so where the address is. But you can see it will do the white pages search. The more you do related to suburbia or such, then you might also have street view and things like that you could sort of kick in as you go through the screen. The same principle will work if I've got a company and I just do the same thing, go into the company field, click the scroll button down, and that'll do a white pages search based on the company name. Companies, of course, are easy to find if they haven't changed name or been bought out, whatever, where they may have moved the address. But a person is very, very hard to find because you have no idea, where they might have gone. On the second screen of the donor record, as Murray had sort of showed before, I can from the front screen press F2, and that will take me to the summary screen of the donor's record. Okay. Most of the things on the donor's summary screen are updated by activity, basically. So things that we've put onto the records, as we go through, if I go through, I can then see on this particular donor's record, I've got the highest donation, the first donation. I'll have the last and the second last donation. Down the bottom, there's the donation total and the donation count. So these two figures are based on the donor's total since they gave their very first gift. The total this year and last year fields are recalculated at the beginning of each financial year based on a program that you run on the housekeeping menu. So if I went out of here, sorry, I'll just get out. So on housekeeping, the very last program here is update new year donor totals. It doesn't ask you a whole lot. It will just ask you a date to start those calculations from. So at the beginning of the financial year, because if you run calendar year or you run financial year, or you might have an organisation where your financial year is May or September or something like that, so you can come in, just put the date in, run the program through, and that will calculate the totals on each of the donors' records. So you may find that you go through, if that hasn't been run, that you'll see a total under total this year where the person's date was more than 12 months ago. So that shouldn't happen. So if you do see that, it just means you can run that program. If we have updated the donor mail history on the donors, down the bottom of the screen here, it'll show the last 4 campaigns that we've mailed people, the number of times we've mailed the person, and the one that becomes a little bit more important to sort of look after is this one here to say the number of times mailed since the person gave their last gift. So in this particular case, this record has come from an Everyday Hero import. So as such, it's fairly recent, so they haven't been included in any of my mailings at the moment. If you update the donor mail history, which is on the donor appeals menu, and normally the last menu option on that menu, the two things you can update is the summary screen that we're just looking at, but it'll also update the donor's full contact history. One of the other fields on the screen that sort of has a duplicate use is this user number up the top right-hand corner. So if I click in there, I can have any sort of alternate ID that I want to have. I can rename this field, so I might call it, alt ID, or it might be a telemarketing ID, or it might be just something else that I want to have, where sometimes I have data that I need to send, back and forward between different data files, and I need to have something that references to say that it is the same record. So in the case of a hospital, then I might have patient numbers, or URN numbers, I think they're called, in there to identify the people. Whereas when I do things like the peer-to-peer fundraising with Everyday Hero and MyCause and Go Fundraise and the imports that we have in Donman at the moment, I can't do that because I'm going to have multiple values for each person, because if they've been a donor and they've been a fundraiser, on both of those platforms, then the person's going to have unique ID numbers that says that, they are the person who participated or donated for that particular event. To see those records, when I click in there, just like the advocate field, like title, you'll see the drop-down button on the side with the 3 dots on. So if I go into user number and do that, it will then show me what's called the keys. Yeah. So when you do an import, the system will automatically put this number in here. So in this case, it's showing that the person was a Everyday Hero donor and their ID number, the date that was put in, and they're also a Go Fundraise donor the next month. Yeah. So if perchance I have done a second import and I've matched this donor, this ID number here, the system will assume that that has to be the same person because they are unique to the individual, and as such it doesn't then ask me to do sort of further duplicate checking and go through. Yeah. So most of the time you don't need to edit these or do anything with them unless there's been some problem. The system will just update them automatically, and if you click in there, you'll be able to see all of those ID numbers. Yeah. So unlike a lot of databases, because there's a lot of different things going on online, so people don't have one unique ID number to say that they are, a donor on Everyday Hero, say, and they don't keep that number with them, which is why there will be multiple values. So even if it's a donor, the person may have half a dozen or more different ID numbers in that list that still belong to, let's say, Everyday Hero. So in here, they've got this one this day. They may have some further back with different numbers, and in the future, they'll have more if they go down to say that that is the unique identifier still for that particular person. So it's one of those fields that sometimes people look at and say, well, everything else I look at here, and if I just put in anything there and go back, you'll see that it doesn't actually relate to what's on the front screen. So it is a little bit of a dual purpose drop-down in this case. So I can have just a static value pretty much on the screen, or I can use it to actually view those alternative IDs that have come from the peer-to-peer fundraising. Okay. On the second screen of the donor record, where those summary totals are, so where it's got the first donation, highest donation, last, all of those things, by default, the campaigns, when we set them up to record the money, will update these fields. But if by chance you said, look, I really want this data here to only be updated in the case of donations, I don't want it for sales, or I don't want it for membership or merchandising or whatever else it may be. Of course, sales and merchandising the same. But when we set up a campaign, there is an option where you can say, don't update the summary totals, and that will then sort of exclude that. So if I'm looking for this, because historically in Donman, just like we've got donors and we've got the donation file, it was never sort of marked as a transaction file. Okay, so whereas nowadays, everything we do can be money from different things. So it could be merchandising that we're doing, or we could have an auction where we've sold items, etc. There's membership. There's a whole lot of different things that come into the mix nowadays. But historically, it's still called a donation, and that does throw people sometimes when they say, but what I'm looking for isn't just, donations. It's showing all transactions. So in this case, the donation on this screen here relates to any transaction at all from the person, but I can, of course, look through and see the full history on the donor if I need to, and that will come from the dollar sign down the bottom will be in red. So whether you're on the first or second screen, so as soon as you come in, this will be red to indicate there's transactions from that person. And if you click there, you'll then be able to get the full history. At the top of that screen is where if I had sales, memberships, raffles, in memoriam, whatever it may be, I can then filter out certain sorts of transactions. So in this case, these are just two straight donations. So it really wouldn't matter if I click on any of these, it'll say there's nothing under sales or memberships, etc. But if we've gone through, set up your campaigns and identified them, as to what sort of money is coming in, then certainly you can do that when you look at a donor's history. Okay. So most of the screen as we go through will be something you can have sort of the default values on, as I mentioned before, for your donor type. There is also a mechanism where you can set up the default mail code down here and the default list. Okay. So normally that is set up in the housekeeping, donor descriptive codes, and other code menu or additional code menu, depending what your menu actually says. And there is a facility in there where you can say, when I put in an individual, I want them to have this mail code and want them to be on whichever particular mailing list. So whenever you create a new person, they can then become the default values. Okay? You can have, things like donor sources default, but as sort of mentioned earlier, bad idea because you may be putting in a whole lot of records that have come from different places, and if a default goes in, the people might just, say, well, they don't have to put anything in there because it goes in automatically, and as such, that doesn't happen. One of the fields on this screen that has a bit of a unique twist to it is this one here called the auxiliary code. What I can do is set it up so if I've worked at an organization where I've got different geographic regions that I actually deal with, then what I can do is set up what's called the branch file. So looking at the postcode that the person's in, this system can then automatically update this auxiliary or this branch based on what I've set up before. So in this case, it's pretty easy. Most of them are just states. But if I said, look, this is my metro area, this is my north, south, west, east, whatever sort of geographic areas you've got, or if you work at a organization where you need to, do some reporting to government for, say the health department or whatever, and they've got geographic regions, you can do the same sort of thing, set up the regions to simulate what the government department's doing, and then when you put in a new donor, this can be an automated field. So when you process payments, you can also, under the system default, set the option to say, I want to pass this to the actual donation processing program, so that when you process a payment, we go back and look at this donor's history, and scroll across, okay? So you'll see that this is where the auxiliary code is being saved, so that if I wanted to do reports based on the regions that I've got set up, I can do that fairly easily, and I don't have to worry about if the person has moved. So if this person, at the time they made these donations, was in New South Wales region, but they then moved to Queensland or Victoria, wherever they moved to, and I update the donor screen, that will change the value on the donor for all future transactions, but it won't change the past transactions. Okay? So it is a way that you can sort of utilize that field to give you a little bit more info as you go through. Things like the bought goods will update automatically if the person has done some sort of merchandising sale. So if they've purchased some, like an entertainment book from us or any other sort of merchandising we do, if we set up the campaign and say that sales, the system will automatically update this for us, and this will be the total of the sales for that person. Okay, so hopefully that's one more field, sorry, because next month we're also doing a little bit more of the, how to look up people and use filtering and some of the other things that we can do from the screen. But one of the other fields that is used quite often, where in this case here I've got Mrs. Kathy Kadinsky, and under my salutation it's Dear Kathy. But if I wanted to have a salutation one way or the other, where I've got the more formal on the front screen, so it becomes Dear Mrs. Kadinsky, but under the what's called the alternate salutation, I can have Dear Kathy. For most organisations that we sort of travel to and meet you guys and discuss what you're using, whatever you want to put on the screen is what people will use. But there is an option down the bottom here under VIP where it's got alternate salutation. So if I say yes there, we'll pop up another screen where I could put in this case I could put Dear Title Surname as the alternate salutation, okay? And then I'd put the alternate name line just as, Mrs. Kadinsky. Okay. What I can also use this for is if I've got a number of people in the same family, where when I send out a mailing, say in the case of a newsletter, I want to send one newsletter but address it to the primary person and the remainder of the family. So then I might have so I can have something like that. And then from my alternate name line, I just take the Dear off and have wherever I want. Because this record here is now marked as a yes to say, look, this is the primary one for this family. Any of the other family members that I said, look, when I do a selection file, I don't want to include those people because I don't want to sort of double up on those mails. I can go into that person's record and say, no, don't select them when I do the segmentation for my selection. When I produce the actual mail merge file, one of the questions on the screen says, do you want to use the alternate salutation? So if I've done both of those things, one at the point of selecting the records and the other at extracting the data, then for this particular record, I'll get this coming out as the alternate salutation and the name line. And for the other members of the family, they'll be excluded by default. If perchance I've saved the alternate salutation under the record, then the question will, will say stay on a yes to show me that there's something there. So if I save the record, so if I had another person in that same family, okay, or they're living at the same household, whatever it might be, if I go in and say yes on this record, then I can say no, don't include it in the non-duplicated mail, and I don't have to have anything in the salutations. Okay. When I save the record, that will go back to no, so it's really only used at the time that I'm doing my selections so that I can sort of exclude those duplicate records. Okay? So hopefully that's given people a bit of an insight into some of the fields and what we can use them for, because like everything, when you're working day to day on things, you don't look at all the fields that you're not using because you're concentrating on the stuff you are. So there are fields that sometimes people don't realise, what they can use it for, or sometimes that they're even there. So I'll hand back to Marla now, and we'll open up for questions.
Thanks, Gary. Just a reminder to everyone, if they do have any questions, to open the little control panel on the right-hand side of your window and type your question in the question pane, and we'll read them out. So we might give everybody a minute or two to do that, because the only questions we had is from someone who has left now, and she was happy with what you'd already provided, Gary. So
Okay.
we'll just
well, what I might do while we're waiting, what I'll do while we're waiting is just show people where they can set those defaults for the donor types, etc.
Great.
So what we need to do is go through into the Modify History Archive menu. Yeah. And in here you'll see there's an option. So for most people, there'll be a prompt come up to put in a password to get into this menu, because in this case I'm sort of have set myself up where I don't need the password, because I use this quite often. But if I go into Modify System Defaults, you'll see at the top of the screen here, these are where the fields are renamed. So if I wanted to call that alt ID number or something like that, when I save that and go back to a donor, that is what will reflect on the screen. Okay, so whatever I change the field to here reflects on the screen. And the next part down on that is where I choose my default salutation. So if I wanted to have dear title surname as the first, default salutation, I can put a 1 in there, put a 2 in that one, and then the third one is just like we saw before, the overrider say, look, this is basically what we're going to have if nothing else goes on. The next part of the screen is also then saying these are what I'm going to have as the defaults when I put in a new donor. Okay, so that's why when I'd added that new donor before I started to add the new donor, it automatically put individual in there. Okay, so that's where you can make those changes if you need to.
Thanks, Gary. A couple of questions have come through. Firstly, from Patricia. If you clear the boxes in the mail list by mistake, can you undo that?
So if you've been through and said, okay, I've gone into this person's record and when I go in, they've got those ticked. If you untick them, you can go back in and tick them again, but the system doesn't have an undo because you've already done it as such. So as soon as you've unclicked that, if you haven't saved it, that'll be okay. But as soon as you click OK, you can see that in this case the list button has gone black again to say there are no lists. So it's pretty much an instant action.
Okay. And from Anthea, can you please repeat how you set the mobile number default?
No, there is no mobile number default. That's what I was saying, that the system will let you put it in any format at all. There is no rhyme nor reason to it, because sometimes you might have a couple where you might put a mobile number and say this is Frank's number, and then you may use the fax number that isn't used very much to put in the mobile number in the case that you've got a Mr. and Mrs. But for the sake of utilizing the data in Excel or other things later, if you just and it's just an entry, we just need to get people to say, look, if you put them in this way, it's going to reward you later.
Great. Okay, thank you, Gary. Looks like that's all the questions for today, so we'll wrap it up there. And of course, if you do have any further questions while we're doing the wrap-up, please type them in the box provided and we can follow up with you offline with those questions. So thank you both, Murray and Gary, for today's very informative webcast. And as we mentioned earlier, our next webcast in September will follow on from today and is on finding donors and their history. And that will be on Tuesday the 15th of September at 2 o'clock. So details are on our website now, so feel free to register now, or you'll get an email in your inbox shortly with those details to register. And of course, you'll find all the recordings of our webcast on our website at donman.net.au under the Resources tab, or you'll find the links posted in our monthly newsletter as well. So if you do have any further questions today, please feel free to pop your question in the box provided or email us at info_donman@advsol.com or give us a call. So that concludes our webcast for today. So thank you again for joining us and goodbye for now.
Goodbye for now.